Johnny Depp, a living testament to the meaning of rising, falling, and rising again. From the haunting sadness of Edward Scissorhands to the confident, captivating charm of Pirates of the Caribbean, Depp doesn't just act. He lives in each character, leaving behind a legacy that makes him one of Hollywood's most mysterious and alluring icons. And just when the world thought the storm had passed, when peace seemed to finally return to his life, a major twist recently stunned his fans. Don't forget to leave a comment with a 1 if today's story inspired you, or 0 if you have a different opinion. Like, share, and subscribe to the channel to follow this story, as it's not just about loss, but about the quiet moments that exist in memories and love. It's heartbreaking, even cruel, when the rise of a legend doesn't start in glory, but in the suffocating chaos of a house too small for the noise inside. This was the beginning of Johnny Depp, born June 9, 1963, in the working-class town of Owensboro, Kentucky. A boy entering a world already trembling under the weight of anxieties. He was the youngest of 4 children, growing up in a home where love and anger sat side by side at the dinner table, where every night was filled with the smell of cigarette smoke, reheated coffee, and an ever-present undercurrent of despair. We moved over 20 times. Living like this never allowed them to open their hearts. The deep abyss never stayed long enough for the walls to remember the sound of laughter. Every move was a goodbye, a lost friend, a dream left on the side of the road. Winters in Kentucky were harsh. Frost spread across the glass faster than dreams, and the hum of the nearly empty fridge became the soundtrack of their survival. Betty Sue counted coins under the flickering light of an old bulb, her hands calloused from work, while John Sr. sat silently under the dim light, staring into a silence so heavy it could break a child's heart. Johnny recalled there were nights when the air trembled before they began to argue. The children slept close together for warmth, listening as the love between their parents dissolved through the thin walls that couldn't keep it in. But then, amid the storm, something fragile and beautiful arose. When Johnny was 12, his mother placed an old guitar into his hands, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps out of love, and she unknowingly saved him. "Music was my sanctuary," he later said. Each note became a lifeline, each chord a confession, each melody a small victory against the noise that had nurtured him. But storms have a cruel habit. They stop only to return even stronger. In 1978, when Johnny was 15, the house sank into silence in the most terrifying way. The silence came after destruction. One bleak morning, he walked down the narrow stairs and found his father gone without a word, the coffee cup still steaming, the chair still pulled out. His absence echoed louder than any words ever could. But by then, the belief in the permanence of the boy had vanished. From that day, he believed in silence more than promises, music more than words, and solitude more than safety. Yet from that rubble, something extraordinary began to rise. Not bitterness, but creativity. The loneliness that seemed to destroy him became fertile ground for his art. The echoes that audiences would one day feel through his performances. He never found a home in walls or towns. He only found sound. In the trembling hum of guitar strings, in the stories that allowed him to rebuild what life had shattered. His pain became poetry. His chaos became art. And the boy who once lived in the storm learned to carve beauty from its ruins. Many years later, he reflected, maybe I didn't survive the fire. Maybe I became the fire. And perhaps that's the silent miracle of Johnny Depp's life. That from the frost and fear he found rhythm and grace, and from a broken beginning he created a world where every broken heart could find its song again. Freedom he thought would heal him, But freedom also comes with its own longing. In 1979, with $35 in his pocket, an old worn guitar case on his back, and no promise of shelter, 16-year-old Johnny Depp boarded a bus heading south, believing that somewhere on the horizon, music would soothe his pain. As the sun rose over the Kentucky sky, he saw his home disappear through the dusty window. The nights in Florida passed by living in makeshift garages reeking of beer and sweat. Along with childhood friend Bruce Whitkin, he formed a small rock band later known as the Kids. The band played anywhere they could. Bars, fairs, parking lots, just enough to buy a gallon of gas and a sandwich to share. There were nights he later recalled the only thing we could afford was hope. But hope couldn't feed a starving boy. Johnny took any job that would give him another day to pursue music, painting houses, selling pens over the phone, hauling broken speakers up narrow stairs. He learned the rhythm of disappointment, the laughter echoing when he begged for another chance. When he played his guitar, the strings cut into his fingertips, making them bleed, but the sound reminded him that he was still alive. The city was harsh. It wasn't kind, just full of lessons. In 1983, at the age of 20, he followed his band to Los Angeles, chasing a shimmering illusion on Sunset Boulevard. They drove cross-country with more belief than fuel, their dreams rattling in the back seat like empty bottles. "We thought we had found paradise," he once said, "but paradise had no room for us." The band broke up, leaving Johnny stranded, penniless, and invisible in a city where value was measured by the spotlight. His wife, Lori Ann Allison, introduced him to a young actor named Nicolas Cage. He looked at Johnny's gaunt face and said, "There's something raw about your eyes. You should try acting." Johnny laughed. It sounded ridiculous. He wasn't trained. He'd never even auditioned for a play. But when you have nothing left to lose, even the faith of a stranger can sound like grace. In 1984, Wes Craven's film A Nightmare on Elm Street was casting for unknown faces. Johnny showed up for the audition wearing a borrowed shirt that still smelled of smoke. He was nervous, exhausted, and ready to quit. But Craven's daughter pointed to him and whispered, "He looks kind." Just that one word changed his life. The role was small and the pay was modest. But for the first time, the world said yes instead of no. Standing on the film set under the scorching lights, he realized that acting was not much different from music. It was another way to express pain through beauty. He often said, "I never wanted to be an actor," but somehow it became the only place where all my pain had meaning. From cold nights and empty pockets, he rose. Not for fame, but to survive. And perhaps that's the true magic in his story. By learning how to endure, Johnny Depp discovered something greater than success itself. Sometimes survival itself is the purest form of art. Hope was finally rewarded. But no one tells you how heavy the dream becomes when it starts to come true. Fame doesn't come suddenly like a thunderclap or fireworks. It sneaks in quietly like dawn creeping into an unslept room. In 1984, at just 21, Johnny Depp took his first hesitant step into a movie set in A Nightmare on Elm Street. The role was small, just a name on a poster, but to him it was magic. By 1987, at the age of 24, the whole world suddenly knew his name. 21, Jump Street turned him into a teen idol. His face appeared on countless magazines. His image was plastered on the walls of young fans who had never heard the soft songs he once played. To them, he was perfection. To himself, he felt lost. "I felt like a commodity," he later confessed. Not an actor, just a brand. On set, the camera loved him, but the person behind the lens began to fade away. The applause echoed, but it didn't sound like the truth at all. Each photo shoot felt like a prison cell. Every headline was a different version of himself that he didn't recognize. The fame he once dreamed of now seemed like a contract written in invisible ink, binding, ruthless, and cold. Then in 1990, the moment that changed everything, arrived Edward Scissorhands. At 27, Johnny found a role that not only defined him, but also understood him. The image of loneliness with hands like blades unable to touch the world without hurting it mirrored the image of the boy who grew up with the fear of breaking everything he loved. Tim Burton understood the monsters inside me. He once said, "Together they built a world for the outcasts, a cinematic sanctuary where pain could become poetry." Film after film, Ed Wood, Benny, and June Sleepy Hollow proved that Johnny Depp was no longer chasing fame. He was chasing truth. Every performance was filled with emotion. Every character carried the ghosts of the past. He was no longer a product of Hollywood. He was its quiet rebellion. Then, in 2003, a storm arrived, turning him into a legend. Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl. When Disney executives first saw his portrayal of Captain Jack Sparrow, they were horrified. "Is he drunk?" they asked. "Is he mocking the studio?" But Depp refused to change. He built the character on instinct with a confident swagger and a bit of rock and roll defiance. The gamble paid off. The film grossed over $650 million worldwide, earning him his first Oscar nomination and redefining what it means to be a movie star. However, behind the eyes and yellowed teeth, he was exhausted. On 130 days of filming, not a real night's sleep, a soul stretched thin between art and exhaustion. Jack saved me, he admitted years later, but he also trapped me. Each subsequent film made him wealthier, more famous, more loved, and somehow emptier. The laughter of the pirate masked the silence of the man. By 2010, at 47, he had reached the peak of his career. Alice in Wonderland had crossed the billion-dollar mark, and he became one of the highest-paid actors in the world, earning over $55 million per film. And when Lone Ranger collapsed at the box office in 2013, losing nearly $200 million, he didn't defend himself. He simply said, "Failure is freedom. It reminds you that you're still human." He had conquered the world, but somewhere between the applause and exhaustion, he began to wonder if the boy with the guitar, the one who only wanted to play music in peace, could still survive beneath all the applause. It's shocking how quickly heaven can turn into hell. The crown that glimmers under the spotlight can also cut into the skin when the lights suddenly go out. By the early 2010s, Johnny Depp stood at the peak of the world. A Hollywood king, a box office icon, a man with an imagination that had built billion-dollar dreams. Alice in Wonderland had just crossed the $1 billion mark, and his income soared to nearly $55 million per film. He had everything the world teaches us to desire. Mansions spread across continents, private jets, yachts gliding over turquoise waters, and an art empire, guitars, and memories that he believed money could protect. But beneath that glamorous exterior, something fragile was cracking. The boy who ran away with $35 and a guitar was now surrounded by accountants, lawyers, and managers. People who spoke in numbers, not in melodies. At the height of his career, reports showed his net worth reaching nearly $650 million. But even empires collapse when the king stops guarding. Depp's faith was bigger than caution. "I trusted others too much," he later admitted. "And perhaps I trusted success too much." Money flowed like an endless river. Over $2 million a month went into maintaining a life that seemed effortless, but was incredibly expensive. There were properties in Los Angeles, a 37-acre village in France, a private island in the Bahamas, and even a 156-foot yacht named Voliroa after his family. He paid 40 employees, rented a private jet at $200,000 a month, and spent $30,000 a month on wine, not out of luxury, but perhaps to drown out the sound of loneliness. He shopped to fill the silence, and that silence only grew louder. There were nights when he stood alone in one of his vast mansion's walls lined with paintings and guitars, the rain tapping on the windows, and he realized he had everything except himself. "I thought I was protecting myself by owning more," he later said, "but all I did was build a cage with softer walls." Then in 2017, that illusion shattered. His longtime management company TMG declared that he was responsible for his own downfall. Depp sued them, accusing them of fraud, negligence, and betrayal. These allegations would expose the deepest cracks in his empire. In the countersuit, TMG revealed the details of his lavish life. Hundreds of millions of dollars were spent, millions were lost, and a fortune evaporated faster than the money he earned. The world was stunned. The headlines no longer talked about his movies. They were about his finances. The artist who once disappeared into characters now had to play the harshest role of all. The defendant was guilty by his own choices. Forbes, the magazine that once named him the highest-paid actor in the world, now published stories about his collapse. The Lone Ranger lost nearly $200 million. Mordecai left almost no mark, and the calls from film studios grew fewer, then stopped altogether. Hollywood, which once craved his name, now turned its attention elsewhere. He told himself the very people who shook your hand at the peak of your career are the first to let go when you start to fall. Not bitterness. It was the truth gently spoken by a man who had learned that fame loves fiercely but quietly forgets. By the end of the 2010s, the empire had collapsed. Piece by piece, house by house, memory by memory, everything was sold. The auction tags hanging on his paintings were like price tags on his former dreams. His yacht, once filled with laughter, was sold to J.K. Rowling. Behind the lens, alongside the unforgettable characters he brought to life, Johnny Depp's real love stories were anything but easy. They were battlefields disguised as dreams. Each relationship played out like a movie too vivid for the screen, captivating at first, tragic when it fell apart. His relationships weren't written in ink, but in ashes, longing, and the quiet pain of a man constantly chasing a love that kept slipping away. Every heartbeat was a gamble, every kiss a spark close to the edge of destruction. The love for Johnny was never settled. It was like a storm promising shelter but always accompanied by thunder. Every woman who entered his orbit found herself trapped between his tenderness and chaos, drawn in by the allure of his soul but burned by its restlessness. His heart, once a sanctuary, would become the stage for the most painful tragedies of his life. Not under the bright Hollywood lights, but in the darkness of his soul. What began with tenderness would soon ignite into a blaze. And in that blaze, the legend of Johnny Depp's love, passion, pain, and the inevitable collapse of it all would be formed. This journey began in 1983. When Johnny, at the age of 20 and still chasing a fading music dream, married Lori Ann Allison, a talented makeup artist 6 years older than him. She was calm while he was restless, steady while he was rough like a quiet compass, leading a young man still learning how to find himself. At a time when his bands were falling apart and the promise of fame seemed like smoke slipping through his fingers, Lori gave him something fame could never provide: stability. She trusted me more than anyone else, Depp later recalled. Thanks to her, he met Nicolas Cage, who encouraged him to try acting. Just one suggestion changed his destiny forever, leading to his debut in the film A Nightmare on Elm Street in 1984. However, even as his path began to shine brighter, the foundation of his marriage also began to crack. Long nights' instability and the growing divide between two worlds gradually pulled them apart. By 1985, just 2 years after their marriage, the young couple quietly divorced with no scandal, no bitterness, and no children. Though brief, that marriage left a lasting mark. A rare moment of tenderness before fame would turn tenderness into a luxury. Decades later, looking back, Depp described that first marriage not as a failure, but as a bridge, a fragile boundary between anonymity and destiny. Sometimes he softly said in an interview years later, "The people who were with you in the beginning aren't always meant to stay, but they show you who you should become." Lori Ann Allison may have stepped out of his story early, but her presence lingered like an unfinished melody. She gave him more than love. She opened the door to a life that would be both a crown and a curse. And though the initial flame had extinguished it, never extinguished its silent purpose: to teach him that even the smallest acts of faith can change a man's life. Fame was still just a distant glimmer. He was young, broke, and restless, constantly moving from one small set to another, unsure if life had any meaning. Then Sherilyn Fenn appeared like a soft light in the fog. They met in 1985 while shooting a small project called Dummies, two unknown actors clinging to fleeting hopes. She was warm, smart, and simple. He was still the quiet boy from Kentucky playing the guitar when words no longer mattered. Their love was gentle and simple, even in the afternoons reading scripts, cooking cheap dinners, and dreaming idle dreams. Sherilyn later recalled, "We were still children. Everything with him was so simple. They got engaged believing kindness could outlast chaos. But when 21 Jump Street premiered in 1987 and catapulted Depp to stardom, simplicity vanished. A packed schedule phone calls grew shorter, and by 1988 they parted ways. No shouting, no betrayal, just two dreamers drifting in opposite directions." For Johnny, she remained the gentle echo of the peace he once felt, the stillness before the world knew his name. For nearly a year, he wandered through hotel rooms and empty stages, quietly embracing loneliness. Then, in 1989, he met Jennifer Grey, the dazzling star of Dirty Dancing. The connection between them was immediate laughter, warmth, and a wild, natural energy, as if he could finally breathe again. By the end of that year, their whirlwind romance had come to an end. "We were progressing at the speed of light," Jennifer later recalled, "and no one can live forever in that kind of light." But fate was not finished. At the end of 1989, at the premiere of Great Balls of Fire, Johnny saw Winona Ryder across the crowded room, and the world seemed to stop. It was truly love at first sight, he admitted later. She was 17, he was 26. Both were on the brink of something extraordinary. When they co-starred in Edward Scissorhands' 1990, art and life completely fused. Edward shy and wounded was him. Kim radiant was her. And the love that grew between them seemed too perfect to exist beyond the screen. They read poetry to each other, walked hand in hand through antique shops, and spoke of marriage as if it had been written in the stars. Depp tattooed Winona forever on his arm, a declaration as deep as his devotion. "He was all my firsts," Winona would say years later. By 1993, under the weight of pressure and misunderstandings, the fairy tale shattered. "It was the first time I suffered," Winona quietly said. "Losing him felt like losing a part of myself." Depp empathized with the pain. "It was like a volcano erupting. My soul shattered. When the breakup came, it left silence." He changed his tattoo from Winona Forever to Wino Forever, hiding his pain with humor. But the love never truly disappeared. Decades later, in some of his most difficult public battles, Winona defended him. "He was never cruel, never violent. He was everything to me." Their story didn't end. It simply became a memory immortal and unfinished, like a faint melody before the last note. After years of chaos, Johnny sought shelter not in peace, but in the fire. And the fire found him in Kate Moss. They met in 1994 at the Tabac Cafe in New York, and over the next 4 years became the golden couple of the decade, a brooding actor and a rebellious supermodel. Their love was intense, passionate, and unpredictable. They were photographed dancing barefoot in hotel hallways, kissing under city lights, then disappearing into the hazy night of airports and after-parties. "No one ever really cared for me like Johnny," Kate later said, adding that he truly loved her fragility. She admired the tenderness hidden beneath his defiant exterior. But when it ended, it felt like the entire world turned upside down. They broke up in 1998 quietly, but painfully. For Depp, it was another reminder that passion, no matter how beautiful, is just a flame that can't burn forever. As the decade closed, Johnny found himself alone, surrounded by applause, but empty from the loss. Each woman revealed a different version of him. Sherilyn's warmth taught him peace. Jennifer's laughter taught him renewal. Winona's soul taught him depth. Kate's fire taught him the consequences. He carried all of this within him, echoes, lessons, scars. What do you think about Johnny Depp's journey through love loss and self-discovery? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to stay updated with more stories about resilience and the human spirit. On a film set in France, a gentle voice would soon call him home. That voice would bring him the greatest peace he had ever known, before the storm would come challenging everything he thought he knew about the human heart. Johnny Depp's longest and perhaps most serene love story began in 1998 when he was 35, meeting singer and actress Vanessa Paradis while filming The Ninth Gate in Europe. Her gaze cut through the noise of the world directly to the part of him that still believed in his roots. What began as a quiet spark grew into something sacred, a refuge far from the noise and temptations of Hollywood. "She saved me," Depp later whispered, "simply by being true to herself." With Vanessa, he found something rare: stability. They settled in the countryside where fame couldn't intrude, and mornings began with coffee and the laughter of children instead of cameras. Their love grew gently but deeply. Its origins were rooted in privacy and simplicity. In 1999, they welcomed daughter Lily Rose, and in 2002, their son Jack. He admitted that becoming a parent calmed his restless soul. He said having children gave him a true foundation, like finally standing on solid ground after years of drifting in the vast ocean. Friends described him as a man who had changed, gentler, steadier, and more peaceful. The wandering boy now plays guitar in the garden and reads before bed by candlelight. For 14 years, they defied Hollywood's skepticism, proving that love can be quiet, yet eternal. They never married, but their love was deeper than any vow. An unspoken promise that some things don't need ceremony to become real. But even the strongest walls can shake. As Depp's work demanded more long days on set, endless travels, creative exhaustion, their rhythm began to drift. By the early 2010s, he was pulled back into the chaos of fame, while Vanessa continued to maintain the family's home, gently raising their children in privacy. The distance grew like a small crack in a window, quietly, invisibly, until one day it shattered. In 2012, at the age of 49, they quietly parted ways. No scandal, no anger, just a silence heavy enough to echo. The last few years were a bit rocky, he gently admitted. But we grew, and we cared deeply about each other and the kids. That's what matters. Behind those calm words was private pain. Friends say he withdrew into solitude, sketching and strumming old tunes, as if trying to remember who he had been before her. Vanessa, always composed, simply said, "Love doesn't just disappear, it changes." Their children became the bridge that still connected them. Lily Rose, then 13, split time between Paris and Los Angeles, while Jack, 10, mostly lived with his mother. There were no fights over money or pride. Their hundreds of millions in assets were quietly divided. Johnny kept the house in the U.S. Vanessa kept the property in France. The issue was not money, but compassion. When such a love ends, a friend once said, "Don't fight over what's left." If this bill passes, Harry and Meghan's titles will be gone. Their story will belong to history. But what remains is something far more powerful, a message. A message that even the monarchy in this new era must ultimately be held accountable. The age of untouchable crowns, the era of unchecked privilege seems to be fading. Price tags on his former dreams. His yacht, once filled with laughter, was sold to J.K. Rowling. Behind the lens, alongside the unforgettable characters he brought to life, Johnny Depp's real love story. Here is the American English translation. A new era, one said to be built on merit and duty rather than mere inheritance, is beginning to rise. King Charles may finally be able to move forward, though the price he must pay, the estrangement of his own son, will continue to weigh heavily on his heart. Prince William will stand more confidently, knowing that in his mind, he has restored the family's honor. Storm, promising shelter but always accompanied by... And somewhere across the Atlantic, under the California sun, Meghan and Harry will have to rebuild on their own. This time, not as rebellious royals, but simply as themselves. Ultimately, the issue is not just about titles. It is about identity, about power, and about consequences. A constitutional earthquake has just struck. Parliament has done what the king would not, stripped Harry and Meghan of their titles. The Sussex circus has come to an end, and Prince William is believed to be the silent architect behind it all. Is this the dawn of a new era of accountability, or a ruthless act of betrayal? If you found this story shocking, hit like and share this video immediately. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss any new developments. And now tell me your thoughts. Do you choose Justice William was right? Not long after quietly closing 14 years of love with Vanessa Paradis, Johnny Depp in his 50s unknowingly stepped into the eye of a storm. In 2009, while filming The Rum Diary, he met Amber Heard. Even then, the chemistry between them was dangerously perfect, too intense a kind of chemistry that fades only to disappear. Depp later whispered, "The kind of chemistry that makes you believe it's destiny." What started as a spark grew into a flame of passion, defiance, and unfulfilled hope. By February 2015, at 51, they were together as husband and wife. To the world, it was a Hollywood dream. For them, it was a fragile agreement between two restless souls. Behind the flash of cameras and radiant smiles, silence began to fracture. Love became unstable, tenderness became tense, and in just 15 months, the once vibrant dream turned to smoke. In May 2016, Heard filed for divorce and sought a restraining order citing emotional instability and behavior related to substance abuse. Depp denied everything. He claimed the truth was not as it seemed, that the story told had lost its soul. But once the truth is out in the world, it no longer belongs to the one who lived it. The headlines cut like knives, sharp, endless, and ruthless. The man once admired for his artistic talent was now a hot topic. His name was torn apart on digital platforms where strangers screamed their verdicts before the court had even spoken. He admitted feeling like he was drowning not in water, but in words. A $7 million settlement was reached in 2017, along with a joint statement calling their relationship passionate, intense, and sometimes unstable, denying any wrongful claims for the sake of benefit. But by then the damage had been done. He lost not only love, but also his identity. The mirror no longer reflected Jack Sparrow or the artist who turned pain into poetry. It reflected a man whom the world no longer trusted to tell his own story. Then in December 2018, darkness returned. Heard published an op-ed in the Washington Post, describing herself as a public figure representing domestic violence. Though his name was not mentioned, it echoed through every line. Depp retaliated with a $50 million defamation lawsuit claiming her words had destroyed his career and life. What followed was not just a regular trial. It became a 6-year public execution under the brightest lights in the world. Movie studios turned their backs. Contracts were canceled. Iconic roles like Jack Sparrow and Gellert Grindelwald were taken from him. His empire crumbled in silence. "They wiped me out before I even had a chance to speak," he later said, his eyes heavy, his voice low. From London to Virginia, from courtroom to courtroom, the world watched as a love story rotted in public, dissected frame by frame, until even their pain became something to be consumed. Both sides struggled to breathe amid the noise, him with his evidence, her with her own truth, while the audience turned their pain into a spectacle. In 2022, at the age of 59, the final act took place in Fairfax, Virginia. Millions watched not just for the verdict, but to see if the man once considered invincible could rise from the ashes. After weeks of testimony, the jury sided with Depp, declaring the op-ed defamatory, awarding him $10 million in compensatory damages and $5 million in punitive damages, later reduced to $350,000, while Heard received $2 million in compensatory damages. In theory, he won, but winning in court couldn't erase the silent years of bleeding. He said, "The truth never screams, it just exists." And survival came at too high a price that fame could never compensate for. The applause that once rang in his ears was now just an empty echo. The stage lights that once worshipped him now felt like a judgment. When the noise finally died down, Depp did not celebrate. He disappeared. Not in failure, but in exhaustion. He sought comfort in the one language that had never betrayed him: music. On stage, beside Jeff Beck, Johnny Depp didn't perform for fame. He played music to feel alive. "Music doesn't judge," he whispered. "It listens." Night after night, he stood under the dim stage lights. Each string carried both the ruin and rebirth of a man who refused to disappear. The audience no longer applauded the pirate or the legend. They applauded the survivor. And perhaps that is the most haunting truth. Fame can elevate a person, but only fire reveals their true self. The verdict returned Johnny Depp his name, but not his youth innocence or the calm he once knew. However, from the rubble he rebuilt. Because art, like the human spirit, can be burned, buried, shattered, but never truly destroyed. In 2022, at 59, Johnny Depp finally whispered these words, "The jury gave my life back. I am truly humbled." But that whisper was not victory. It was the final breath of a man who had spent 6 years walking barefoot through the flames. It wasn't joy. It was relief. A trembling breath from someone who had drowned for too long and just emerged from the water. Each day leading to that moment was a slow trial of pain. Every headline grew deeper, every hour of trial. Another layer of his soul was peeled away under the glaring fluorescent lights and judging eyes. What the world considers pleasure he endured like dissection. Later he confessed, "We begin to drown in the noise until we forget the sound of our own voice." The man who once stunned the world with his quirky brilliance now aged not by time, but by sorrow. His eyes, once vibrant with mischief and defiance, now bore the stillness of one who had witnessed too much. And when the camera caught him silently sketching in the courtroom, it wasn't art. It was survival. Line by line, he retreated from the edge, battling the invisible weight of skepticism and isolation. The wild soul that once roamed free was now scorched and scarred, but never extinguished. Somewhere beneath the rubble, the heartbeat still beats. When the verdict came, it didn't bring fame back to him. It brought breath. For the first time in years, he exhaled. Yet even as the crowd roared in his favor, the silence within him was deafening. Exoneration, he realized, could not erase the scars. It simply allowed him to carry them with dignity. "You can't walk out of a storm like that," he muttered. "You just have to learn how to live with the rain." And in that rain, something extraordinary began to bloom. His face, wrinkled and weary, no longer showed decay, but resilience. It wasn't time that made him age, but experience. Each wrinkle was a testament to survival, each shadow a map of where he fell and got back up. He burned, yes, but the ashes are fertile. From destruction came depth. From loss came grace. The man who once sought admiration now seeks peace. He traded the stage lights for solitude, noise for meaning. For the first time, the world wasn't looking at a star. It was looking at the man behind the legend. The love for Johnny was never a peaceful refuge. It has always been a battlefield. Every love left its mark. Devotion turned to disappointment, gentleness to torment. But perhaps that's the price of immersing oneself in a world obsessed with facades. Beneath the headlines and the frenzy, one truth remained. He broke, but he was not erased. The star's mask shattered, revealing something raw and radiant beneath. A man who no longer has any pride, full of scars, but sincere, tired, yet resilient. "I don't think you actually win," he reflected years later. "You just survive long enough to find yourself again." That quiet statement holds more weight than any applause. It's the wisdom of a man who has learned that sometimes the greatest victory is simply standing firm when life tries to bury you. And perhaps that's the quiet magic that haunts his story. That beneath the scandals, the exile, and the ruin, the human spirit finds a way to rise and sing. The world that once saw him fall now witnesses something rarer. Not a comeback, but a resurrection. Because in the end, Johnny Depp did not conquer the storm. He endured it. He turned pain into poetry, shame into strength, silence into song. The legend may have faded, but that man, though scarred and broken, remains human. And in that, there's a lesson for all of us. That dignity doesn't lie in never falling, but in rising again and again from the ashes of ourselves. Now at 62, Johnny Depp lives a life completely different from the chaos he once endured. Quieter, humbler, yet incredibly rich in both meaning and material legacy. His net worth, once thought to have vanished in legal battles and reckless management, has risen back to an estimated $150 million, a testament not to waste, but to perseverance. He no longer chases money. Money chases him. The boy who left home with $35 and a worn guitar now owns an empire of art, music, and global real estate where glory and tragedy coexist. From the rolling hills of Somerset, England, where he recently purchased a $16 million rural estate, to his historic $55 million chateau in France, spanning more than 30 acres. Each property tells a story of rebirth of a man gradually rebuilding the peace he once lost. His home in Somerset is not a lavish palace, but a sanctuary. It lies amidst gardens, ancient trees, and a quiet that only someone who has become accustomed to noise can truly appreciate. Inside, there are old guitars next to oil paintings, many of which are his, and shelves filled with books once owned by his literary heroes, such as Kerouac and Wild Ho. The walls are decorated with photos of his children, Lily Rose and Jack, both of whom have grown into vibrant echoes of his better self. "They are my compass," he once softly said. "They saved me in ways I can't explain." His relationship with them is now strong, gentle, and deeply protective, not based on fame, but on forgiveness. Lily Rose Depp, born in 1999, has created her own path as a model and actress conquering the world with a blend of mystery and resilience inherited from her father. She often speaks of him with quiet respect and pride. "He is the most loving and supportive person I've ever had," she once said. "And he taught me that being different is a gift, not a curse."
I think the girls with their nails done now.
Jack Depp, born in 2002, has chosen a different, more private artistic life, staying away from the spotlight. He paints, plays music, and prefers silence to showmanship. Depp often smiles when he talks about him. Jack embodies the best of both worlds, his mother's grace and a bit of my craziness. For the man who once feared losing them in life's storms, their happiness is now his greatest treasure. Despite the scars of the past, Depp now lives quietly with his creations. his passion for art has flourished into success. His self-portraits and portraits of celebrities depicting legends such as Bob Dylan, Elizabeth Taylor, and Heath Ledger were sold for over $4 million just hours after their release. Each piece carries the mark of pain and resilience. The brushstrokes seem to whisper, "I have overcome it all." Music is also his refuge. After years of performing with Jeff Beck, he continues to record and tour with his rock band Hollywood Vampires, playing music not for fame, but for his love of music itself. In a recent interview, he shared that music is the only truth that has never betrayed him. His assets, once symbols of extravagance, have now become reminders of gratitude. He still owns a collection of over 40 guitars, a few vintage cars, and several timeless mementos from his cinematic legacy. The compass from Pirates of the Caribbean, a pair of Edward Scissorhands gloves, and the original typewriter he used while preparing for Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. He even kept a smaller yacht, not to indulge in luxury, but to escape to write to drift in the peace that fame once robbed him of. Where there was once chaos, now there is discipline. Where there was once excess, now there is purpose. Beyond material wealth, perhaps the deepest measure of Depp's rebirth lies in his quiet, generous acts. Over the past decade, he has donated millions of dollars to charitable causes close to his heart. Los Angeles Children's Hospital, Great Ormond Street Hospital in London, where he once appeared in his Jack Sparrow costume to surprise sick children, and many global disaster relief efforts. In 2023 alone, it's said that he donated over $1 million to youth arts programs and humanitarian funds, not through press releases but anonymously, through the humility that has shaped his being. If you're fortunate enough to have more than you need, he once said, build longer tables, not higher walls. He still writes, still paints, still searches for meaning beyond the accolades. The storms of the past did not erase him, they forged him. He no longer belongs to Hollywood or even to legend. He belongs to the stillness. Every morning in Somerset begins the same way. The gentle crackling of a vinyl record on the old turntable, the smell of black coffee, and the slow, unhurried rhythm of a man who has finally found peace with the world and himself. His home breathes the air of a sanctuary. The windows open, birds singing faintly, and the rustle of a life rebuilt not from fame, but from forgiveness. The fame that once shaped him has now faded into something purer, a legacy. His journey reminds us that even the fiercest storms can forge light in a person's soul. The fire may have taken so much from him, but from the ashes a quiet strength and the courage to begin again have risen. And to you, dear listener, wherever you are, whatever storm you have passed through, may Johnny's journey remind you that even the fiercest flames can forge strength. And even from the deepest depths, beauty can rise. Thank you for watching this video. Leave a comment with 1 if you resonate with Johnny Depp, or 0 if you have a different opinion. Don't forget to hit the like button, share the video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss out on more meaningful stories from us. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in the next video.